The monastery was still wrapped in darkness when Padre Pio awoke, long before the first bell rang for morning prayer. The crisp mountain air seeped through the stone walls, carrying with it a strange, heavy stillness, so dense, so intimate, it felt almost alive. He sat up slowly on the wooden cot, listening. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. Even the wind, which usually moaned through the corridors at night, had stilled. Yet something was there, a presence he could not name, pressing gently upon his chest like an unseen hand. Padre Pio dressed quietly and made his way to the chapel. The stone floor was cold even through his sandals, and the flickering sanctuary lamp cast long, trembling shadows across the altar. Kneeling before the tabernacle, he closed his eyes and let his heart settle into prayer. But prayer would not come. Instead came a weight, soft, sorrowful, familiar. A suffering soul is here, he thought. Close, nearer than breath. The heaviness intensified, like the quiet grief of someone standing just beyond the edge of sight. Padre Pio raised his head slowly. A figure stood at the back of the chapel. A woman. A nun. The air around her shimmered faintly, as though she were caught between two worlds. Her habit flowed around her like a soft shadow, but her face was pale, unearthly pale, marked by fear and trembling. Her hands were clasped tightly over her chest as if she were holding herself together. Padre Pio felt her sorrow before she took a single step. This soul is wounded. Deeply. He rose gently from his knees and turned toward her. Yes. He knew exactly what she carried. The weight of doubt. Not the loud, rebellious doubt of someone rejecting God, but the silent, suffocating kind, born from years of praying without consolation, serving without feeling seen, believing without feeling God's presence. Her eyes lifted, and her voice emerged in a trembling whisper. I tried to believe, but I could not feel him. The words struck like a confession from the depths of a drowning heart. Decades of devotion, spoken in one broken sentence. Padre Pio felt compassion surge through him so strongly it nearly brought him to tears. How many souls had he seen who mistook silence for rejection? How many holy people had lived their entire lives believing themselves unloved because God did not grant sweetness or spiritual warmth? There are souls, he had once said to his novices, who love God in darkness. Their faith is not felt, it is chosen. But this nun, this soul, had never understood that truth. Her eyes were full of shame. I was supposed to be an example, she whispered. Those words pierced him deeper than any accusation. So that was the chain that bound her, the crushing belief that holiness meant appearing strong, certain, unwavering. She had carried her suffering alone. He stepped closer, speaking softly. Did you ever tell anyone? The nun looked down, her face twisting with pain. I could not. Padre Pio saw at once the tragedy of her life. She had mistaken dryness for failure. She had mistaken silence for abandonment. She had mistaken the absence of emotion for the absence of God. Her soul trembled. I died believing. God never loved me. And those words broke his heart open. A thin line of dawn appeared behind the stained glass windows, casting faint colors on the chapel floor. But the true light that filled the room was not of earth. It emerged suddenly, quietly, like a sunrise behind a mountain, brightening the space around the nun's soul. It was warm and golden, yet profound and weighty, carrying the unmistakable presence of eternal truth. Padre Pio recognized it immediately. Not the light of glory, the light of revelation. The nun stepped back instinctively, her hands trembling as the radiance grew. She covered her face, expecting judgment, expecting condemnation, expecting, perhaps, the very rejection she feared throughout her life. Padre Pio whispered gently, "Do not be afraid. Heaven is not here to expose your failures, but to reveal your faith." The light softened, glowing like sunlight through a church window. Within it, her life unfurled, scene after scene, memory after memory. Not the moments she had feared, but the victories she never recognized. She watched herself as a young sister, tending to the sick with hands that trembled from exhaustion. She saw the years of silent chores, washing floors, preparing meals, folding linens, tasks she believed insignificant but had offered faithfully each day. She saw the countless times she forced herself to kneel in prayer, even when her heart felt like stone. She saw mornings where she whispered, "Lord, I am here," despite the heaviness pressing on her soul. Padre Pio spoke quietly, reverently. What you thought was weakness was actually strength. The nun shook her head, tears streaming. But I felt abandoned. The light shifted again. Now she saw something she had never known. In every moment of silence, in every hour, she prayed alone. While believing God was distant, another figure had been beside her. Jesus, kneeling beside her in the chapel, walking beside her in the garden, standing beside her in the laundry room, watching over her in the darkness of her cold little cell. When she begged God to speak, he was closer than her own breath. Her lips trembled. "I was not alone?" Padre Pio's voice cracked with emotion. "Never." The light enveloped her more fully, revealing a mystery she had longed for all her life. There are souls God invites into a special form of suffering, a suffering that mirrors the silence of Christ in Gethsemane, a suffering that redeems others without the one who carries it ever knowing, a suffering God entrusts only to those he loves deeply. "You thought you were forgotten," Padre Pio whispered, "but God chose you for the hardest love, the love that persists without reward." The nun collapsed to her knees, weeping, not from despair, but from the birth of a truth she had never dared imagine. But heaven's revelation was not complete. Though the nun understood now that God had never abandoned her, another shadow clung tightly to her soul, a lie so deep, so old, it had woven itself into her identity, her unworthiness. She lifted her eyes, still overflowing with tears. "I doubted him," she whispered. "I doubted his love. How can he love a soul that doubted?" Padre Pio knelt beside her. His eyes were filled with a compassion that seemed to carry the gentleness of Christ himself. "Your doubt was not rebellion," he said softly. "It was longing." The words struck her like a gentle thunderbolt. He continued, "There is a doubt that pushes the soul away from God, and a doubt that pulls the soul toward him, aching for certainty." She stared at the radiant scenes unfolding around her, years of silent fidelity, hidden sacrifices, quiet endurance, and she saw the truth. Her doubt had never been a rejection of God. It had been a desperate desire for him. But still, she trembled. "I thought I disappointed him." Now the light shifted again, filling the chapel with a brightness so intense it made the colors in the stained glass blaze like living fire. Within that light she saw her life not through her own eyes, nor through Padre Pio's, but through God's. Not the prayers lacking emotion, but the faith it took to say them. Not the dryness, but the endurance built in it. Not the silence, but the trust hidden inside it. Not the doubt, but the courage to remain. And deeper still, beneath every act of service, beneath every sacrifice, beneath every moment of loneliness, she saw a truth so overwhelming it tore through the last layer of fear. Christ had loved her, more intensely, more tenderly, more faithfully than she had ever imagined. The nun broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I thought," he turned away. Padre Pio touched her shoulder gently. "No, in your silence," he drew closer. "In your emptiness, he filled you. In your doubt, he held you. You were never alone, not even once." The shadow of unworthiness began to dissolve. The fire of divine truth cleansed her, not with pain, but with healing. The light around them deepened, shifting now not toward memory, but toward consequence, the spiritual fruit her hidden suffering had produced. The nun watched in astonishment as heaven revealed the unseen effects of her life. She saw souls she never knew she had touched, people she comforted simply by praying for them in her dryness. She saw young sisters who found strength in her silent perseverance. She saw suffering people uplifted by her kind words, offered despite her own interior wounds. She saw graces that flowed through prayers she thought were empty. She saw spiritual battles she helped others win while she believed herself powerless. Every tear she shed in silence had watered the souls of others. The nun gasped. I did that?" Padre Pio nodded, tears in his eyes. "What you thought was failure was intercession." She fell to her knees again, her hands trembling. All her life she had believed she gave God nothing of worth. Now she saw that her hidden fidelity had been one of heaven's greatest treasures. But one wound remained, the lie of being unloved. That final chain had to break before she could rise into the fullness of grace. The light grew brighter, brighter than any sunrise, yet softer than candlelight. In its glow, she saw something she had begged for all her life. How God saw her. A small soul, hidden, faithful, wounded, and deeply, fiercely, eternally loved. The revelation broke the last remnants of despair. The darkness that had clung to her for decades evaporated like mist under the rising sun. Now she was ready. The final moment approached, the moment she had feared all her life, judgment. But instead of wrath, Instead of divine distance, instead of condemnation, she felt peace. A peace so radiant it filled every corner of her being, a peace so gentle it healed wounds she had hidden even from herself, a peace so complete it felt like coming home. The purifying fire of God's love embraced her, not burning, cleansing, restoring. She whispered through her tears, "What happens now?" Padre Pio smiled softly. "Now you go to the place where the wounded are healed by love, where doubt becomes understanding, where silence becomes song, where every moment you felt abandoned is revealed as a moment you were held the closest." Her soul glowed, freed from every chain, no more shame, no more fear, no more despair. Only trust. Angels appeared around her, their faces shining with a joy that made the very air vibrate. One stepped forward and extended his hand. "Come," he said gently. "Your faith was greater than you knew." The nun took his hand. Her entire being brightened, as though a lifetime of burdens had finally been lifted. She looked at Padre Pio one last time, a look filled with gratitude deeper than words, and then she rose. She disappeared into the purifying embrace of God's mercy. Padre Pio remained kneeling long after the vision ended. His tears dripped onto the chapel floor as he whispered a prayer for all hidden souls who suffer in silence. Later he said, "The souls who think God is far from them are often the ones he holds closest to his heart." Every. And he added, "A soul that seeks God in darkness pleases him more than a soul that loves him only in light." For centuries, the pages of Christian history have been illuminated with the visions of saints, fiery revelations, angelic visitations, voices from the celestial realm, and apparitions that shook kingdoms and converted nations. People today often wonder, why did the saints of old receive such overwhelming visions while modern souls walk mostly in silence? What changed? Did heaven speak less, or did humanity stop listening? To understand this mystery, we must first look at the world the saints once inhabited. In the ancient church, the spiritual atmosphere was raw, unfiltered, almost violent. The line between heaven and earth was thin, because humanity was still spiritually young, like a child whose senses are unguarded and open. The early saints lived in a world where the supernatural was not hidden behind noise, distractions, philosophies, and endless self-analysis. Life was simple, perilous, and profoundly dependent on divine intervention. People expected God to work in dramatic ways because they needed him to. The early martyrs felt Christ strengthen them in the arena. Desert fathers saw demons materialize before them like beasts, mystics like Street Gertrude, Street Catherine of Siena, and Street Teresa of Avila received visions because the church was being built, shaped, and instructed. Heaven revealed itself in bursts of flame because humanity was still learning the language of God. Revelation served a purpose. Saints were raised up to correct heresies, confront corrupt rulers, call nations to repentance, and protect the innocent. Extraordinary times required extraordinary grace. Like thunder at the birth of a storm, heaven spoke loudly to awaken the world. And the saints were the chosen instruments who heard the echo of eternity. But there is another reason, one even deeper, the purity of their hearts. The saints of old lived in a world without screens, without relentless noise, without the constant buzzing of information that saturates the modern mind. Their interior world was quiet. They could hear a whisper because their souls were trained in silence. Prayer was not a task, but the air they breathed. Mortification was not an optional discipline, but the rhythm of their daily existence. And where there is purity, the veil thins. Yet heaven has never sought to dazzle with visions for entertainment. Visions were given for missions, missions that often demanded suffering of the highest order. Nearly every saint who saw heaven also tasted hellish trials, persecution, ridicule, bodily torment, spiritual darkness. God gave visions not to elevate them above humanity, but to equip them for the crosses they would carry. And so the question is not why heaven revealed so much then, but why it reveals so little now. Perhaps heaven has not changed. Perhaps humanity has. The saints of old entered silence and found fire. The saints of today enter silence and find emptiness, not because God is not there, but because our interior world is crowded, chaotic, filled with anxieties, screens, and self-obsession. We do not lack visions because heaven is stingy. We lack visions because our hearts rarely stand still long enough to receive them. But there is still a deeper mystery, one that leads us into the modern age, a world where darkness grows subtle, quiet, undetected. A world where visions do still occur, but the noise of the age buries them before they can rise, and in the void left by heavenly silence, something else has begun to whisper. If the saints of old lived in a world illuminated by visions, then modern humanity lives in the age of shadows, a time when the supernatural has not vanished, but shifted. The question is not whether God stopped speaking, but what began to speak more loudly. The early Christians faced demons that manifested visibly, snarling faces, violent temptations, apparitions that left physical marks. Satan attacked openly because the world still believed in the spiritual realm. But today, the devil rarely needs thunder or terror. He has learned something far more effective: subtlety. St. Paul once wrote that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. In modern times, he has refined that disguise into something more deadly: normality, moral relativism, distractions, ideologies, addictions hidden behind screens, fear disguised as practicality, pride disguised as self-expression, atheism disguised as intellectual maturity. Demons today no longer need to roar, they only need to whisper. And people listen. This shift has caused a profound spiritual dullness. Modern society does not fear hell because it does not believe in it. It does not hunger for heaven because it believes it can create its own paradise. The greatest victory of the devil is not possession, but indifference, not horror, but numbness. In such an age, God's visions become rare not because his love has weakened, but because humanity has numbed its spiritual senses. Divine light is still present, but it competes with thousands of artificial lights. Revelation has become drowned under distraction. The spiritual battlefield is no longer external. It has moved inward into the interior of the human heart. This is the age of hidden warfare, a war fought through despair, anxiety, self-loathing, overthinking, material addiction, and emotional wounds. A war where demons do not appear as monsters but as familiar thoughts. You are worthless. God is distant. No one cares. You will never change. Your prayer is useless. You are alone. The saints of old battled demons in the desert. The saints of today battle demons in their minds. And these battles, though unseen, are no less intense. If anything, they are more dangerous because they occur in silence, undetected, untreated, unspoken. The modern soul bleeds invisibly, yet God has not abandoned his people. He has simply changed his strategy. When darkness moves silently, light must move silently too. When the enemy hides in thoughts, grace hides in perseverance. When visions become rare, God forms saints not through revelation but through endurance. We live in the age of silent holiness. The saints of today are not recognized by ecstasies or miracles. They are recognized by their quiet courage. The mother who prays through exhaustion, the young man who resists addiction, the elderly woman who suffers loneliness with faith, the priest who perseveres despite dryness. These are the modern mystic souls who love God without visions, without sweetness, without reward. And heaven values them more than the world will ever understand. The final mystery is this: if heaven speaks less today, is it because humanity has no need of visions, or because the world is entering a time where faith must be purified? The saints of old were given visions to strengthen the church in its infancy. But in the last days, the church is asked to walk a harder path: faith without sight, love without feeling, perseverance without consolation. God is preparing a generation of saints whose holiness will be forged not through ecstasy, but through endurance. Street. John of the Cross once taught that spiritual dryness is not a punishment, but a promotion, God's way of maturing a soul, purifying its love, detaching it from feelings, so it might cling to God alone. Many modern souls live permanently in this dark night, not because they are far from God, but because they are close to Him. The absence of visions is not proof of God's silence. It is proof of His trust. Those who loved Him with visions had great missions. Those who love Him without visions have greater faith. And yet, heaven still speaks, but not through fire, through whispers, not through apparitions, through conscience, through scripture, through quiet acts of charity, through moments of unexpected clarity, through the silent, interior pull that leads a soul to prayer. This is why modern saints like Padre Pio, like the nun in darkness, like countless hidden souls are so precious to God. They do not love Him for what they feel, they love Him for who He is. The age of visions built the early church. The age of darkness will sanctify the final church. And though the devil hides in subtlety, God hides in grace. Though evil whispers lies, heaven whispers truth. Though darkness grows silent, light grows deeper. The greatest saints of history may not be those who saw visions of angels, but those who lived without visions and still remained faithful. For in the end, it may be that the silence of God is not distance, but preparation, not abandonment, but purification, not punishment, but an invitation into the most heroic, hidden, and precious form of love. Faith without sight, hope without reassurance, love without reward. The saints of old saw heaven. The saints of today carry it in their wounds. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey, a journey through sacred history, through the blazing visions of the saints of old and the haunting silence of our modern age. We have walked through these stories not merely to listen, but to reflect, to examine our hearts, and to ask the unsettling question: why did God once speak so clearly through visions, while today the world seems to hear mostly the whispers of the unseen darkness? If you have reached this point, it means something inside you is searching for truth, for light, for understanding in a time when confusion spreads faster than faith. And for that, I want to thank you, sincerely. Not everyone has the courage to explore topics this deep, this sacred, and this confronting. Not everyone dares to face the possibility that perhaps the silence of God in our times is itself a message, perhaps even a warning. I truly want to hear what you think. What touched you? What challenged you? Do you believe true visions still occur today? Or do you feel that humanity has fallen into a spiritual fog where only faint glimmers of grace remain? Have you ever experienced something mysterious, something that strengthened your faith or something that filled you with fear? Your voice matters. Your thoughts matter. Sometimes a single comment, a single personal story, can speak to someone who desperately needs hope, clarity, or the courage to return to God. If this story stirred something in your heart, even a small spark, I invite you to share this video. With one simple action, you might bring light to someone standing at the edge of despair, someone who needs exactly this reminder, exactly this message, at exactly this moment. And if you wish to continue this journey with me through stories of faith, miracles, warnings, prophecies, and the subtle battle between heavenly truth and demonic deception, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are more stories waiting for you, more reflections, more signs of the times to discern together. We are living in an age when darkness works quietly, cleverly, and relentlessly. But remember this: light has always been stronger, and sometimes all it takes is one story, one message, one moment of honesty to awaken a soul. Thank you once again for listening with an open heart. Please share your thoughts below, share this video with someone who might need it, and let us continue to keep the flame of faith burning in a world that needs it more than ever.